Go.
So my day was a quick drive to Valley Forge, which was very exciting because my friend Mr. Lukash lives in the park proper.
Who's Mr. Lukash like?
John Lukash, the historian. And
So tell us what you really. So you went to visit John Lukash, the historian.
Went to visit John Lukash to help him with his archive. He's been asking
And who
me
is
to do
he?
this for 2 years.
For those of us who don't know.
John is one of the preeminent historian philosophers of the last 50 years whose specialty is the Second World War, focused especially on Hitler and Churchill. And he invited me down after our initial conversations here in the city. We met about 18 months ago after I wrote him a letter having read his last book on Churchill, telling him how much I admired him, asking if I could be of any help. And we met at the Regency about 18 months ago to have a drink and talk about the opportunity.
You have to speed this up because people don't have a lot of patience
the
when they're vlogs.
So nonetheless, I drove down to Valley Forge. He lives in the national park, which was the first time I'd seen Valley Forge, and drove past Washington's headquarters. And we spent the morning working on the papers and coming up with a game plan for what we're going to do. And then he was kind and served me a quick, very light lunch. And afterwards, went into his humidor and came out with 2 Churchill family cigars that had been given to him by Winston Churchill before he died, the grandson, and said he'd been saving these cigars for us to smoke together. And we sat out in his backyard by the river that runs through the property and smoked our Churchill family cigars very happily, drinking iced tea. And in the course of it, he told me he was 87 years old, remarkably moving stories about his childhood in Budapest during the Second World War. The first being that when he was 21 and he came home from a dance at his local gymnasium, his mother at 1 in the morning was still awake and the light underneath her bedroom door was open. He went in to make sure she was okay, and she was lying in bed in her negligee listening to this vast radio. And tears were in her eyes, and she said, this was on December 6, 1941, the Americans have joined the war. In telling the story, he was so moved by the experience of his mother and this story that he himself, while smoking a cigar, broke into tears and had to pause for 5 minutes. The next anecdote he told me, after having dried his eyes, was about the day he came home and found his mother again listening to the radio on June 6, 1944, and his mother broke into tears and said, the Allies have landed on the beaches of Normandy. In telling both those stories, he was so moved by what he described as the sharpness of the memories that he himself broke into tears in the process of telling these stories. We then spent the next hour talking about Churchill, Hitler, and Heisenberg.
So it was what you'd have to say. This was a real Churchill This was a Churchill day.
I mean, you sitting by the river, smoking Churchill cigars, talking about Hitler and Churchill and Heisenberg with John Lucas would have to be one of the highlights of the last 6
short of Derek
months.
Jeter showing up, this really...
No, Derek Jeter could have shown up and sat in the river as far as I was concerned. I mean,
Really?
This triumphed in ways that Mr. Jeter's presence would have done nothing but diminish. We'd have to explain to Mr. Jeter, I suspect, who Heisenberg and Churchill and Hitler were. So